Welcome back to Knowledge Resources Speaker Feature. Today, we're sitting down with the founder and CEO of Inclusivity Consulting, Veronica King. Veronica will be speaking at the Johannesburg location of the upcoming HR Summit, and today she will be giving us a quick and exclusive preview as we discuss inclusivity in the modern workplace. Veronica, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Amy. It's good to be here.
Amazing. So just to start us off in the discussion, could you give us a brief overview of what you'll be speaking about at the conference and what we have to look forward to?
Great, thank you. There's actually quite a long list. There's different topics, but I think just as an overview, it's really important that we start speaking about how do we create inclusivity in organizations. More and more my conversations around this work is about developing inclusive leaders so that enables them to create inclusive environments. And the aspects of an inclusive environment are ensuring that there's psychological safety, that there's representation, that people feel that they belong and not have to fit in. So those are a few of the ideas that we're going to be speaking about. And I think the one that's really quite an important piece of the agenda is about race and the unintended consequences, because that links directly to our unconscious bias and prejudices we hold based on our history. So I know the word race makes many people cringe, but we have to have uncomfortable conversations if things really need to change.
Interesting that you mentioned our history as well, because one of the reasons I'm so excited to be speaking to you is you have such a broad international experience. Your organization really works across borders. I know you've worked in Dubai, the US, the UK, India, Turkey, just really to just name a few. And I think my own lens and that of many of the colleagues and people that I know is very limited towards South Africa and our own history and our own story. Are there any lessons that you've learned on the international stage that you would love to see implemented in South Africa more, or perhaps vice versa? Is there any aspects of the South African journey that you would love to see take place internationally?
Yeah, I think that it's a bit of both. So because I'm South African and I've started the work predominantly in South Africa, the lessons learned from South Africa, so to speak, are really important when I do speak about them on the international stage, as you say. And the one that they're very interested in, that my international clients and audience are often very curious about, is how do we define equity? Because equity is distinct from equality. So speaking about equity and identifying the people, especially Black, Indigenous people of color, who have not had equal access to certain privileges and resources, it's important that that is identified. I think people who are uncomfortable speaking about the marginalization of certain minority groups prefer to say, oh, we're all equal now. And we all know that that's not actually the truth. So when you speak about the lessons that are very important for both the global North and the global South, would be really unpacking and being very clear on the definition of equity. I think it's important that we focus on individuals' lived experiences and not just the concepts of diversity, equity, and inclusion, because that's when we will be able to identify the need for equity. The other as well, because of the influence of the global North or the Eurocentricity of most standards, I think many organizations define their cultures based on Eurocentric standards, be those standards of image and beauty, of knowledge, of education. So it's really important for me that we start really paying attention to the local voices being centered, because people with privilege have been centered for the longest time. And I think we would all be able to learn and be exposed to a lot more diversity that will enable sincere inclusion. And then and the other thought as well is that recognizing more and more, both here and abroad, that diversity is insufficient without without inclusion. And if anything, it actually is a pity that we've all become used to the ubiquitous term DEI. If I had my way, I would start with inclusion. Because when the inclusion is in place and people feel that they are represented, seen, heard, valued, and respected, they would feel that their uniqueness and distinctiveness feels welcomed, and that they have a true sense of belonging, and that they don't have to assimilate to fit in. So those are the ones that come to mind right now.
Amazing. And those are all things that I think you would like to hear spoken of more in these discussions, is more discussions on equity of lived experiences. So there's a really great touch points that you mentioned. I'd like to tie it into my next question, because I know the tagline of the topic at the conference is less talk and more action. So I'd like to flip it a little bit away from things we'd like to speak more about and ask you, what are some topics that you feel have become talking traps almost, or are overly discussed and we should move away from in the inclusivity and diversity discussion?
I think diversity, so everyone speaks about diversity training and diversity workshops. And I also think there's an element of diversity fatigue. So if we can, and that's part of my strategy and the way I help organizations, we need to start moving away from just the awareness to the action. I think diversity training has been topical for years, post 94. And I think that we need to move from awareness to action. So the action is not just about having your EE targets achieved. And again, I want to revisit what I'd said earlier. We need to start focusing on inclusion. And if we can really get the inclusion piece correct, diversity will take care of itself. So I think that's the talking track that comes to mind when you ask me that question, that just talking about diversity and achieving EE targets is certainly not enough. And I think to also recognize that if we aren't focusing, it's actually about focusing on how critical inclusion really is. Because you often hear, well, I often hear organizations speak about and lament with deep sadness that they're not being able to retain certain staff. And to be specific, many organizations are struggling to retain Black talent and Black professionals. So if those talking traps can really move away from just EE targets and less talk on EE targets and action on what are we doing in our environments to really ensure that there is psychological safety and all people are expected and represented.
That's very insightful, and I think it's something that we'll all walk away with from your presentation. Just hearing you speak, I can already envision the many insights we'll gain. Just as a closing question, what is your hope? What do you hope attendees will walk away with after hearing your presentation?
I'm really, really hoping that they walk away focusing on what would action look like for them. Because it's about what would action look like. It's about recognizing and accepting that equity takes time and commitment. And that's if, again, we start these processes and these conversations focusing on the equity and recognizing that it's not going to happen overnight. And how do we really put our time, commitment, effort, and energy into achieving that?
And that's really what the discussion is about, is less talk, more action. So let's talk about action and walking away with actionable actions, for play on words. So thank you so much for sitting down with me today, Veronica. I've really enjoyed it. It's been very insightful. If anyone watching would like to hear more from Veronica or from any of our other brilliant presenters, please make sure to register using the link below. Thanks so much, Veronica.
Thank you, Amy. It's been lovely talking to you.